The hum of machines filled the room with a steady rhythm, the kind of sound that became a background melody in the intensive care unit. Fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over the walls, making everything feel still, suspended in a strange in-between place. A middle-aged man lay motionless on the hospital bed, his chest rising and falling in slow, assisted breaths. Clear tubes ran from his nose and mouth to the ventilator beside him, while beeping monitors displayed the fragile balance that kept him alive. His face was pale, but peaceful, almost as if he were merely sleeping. Beside him sat his daughter, her hand tightly wrapped around his, as if her grip could anchor him to the world. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back loosely, clothes rumpled from days spent here without rest. Every few minutes, she would glance at the monitors, then back at his face, whispering words only he could hear. She wasn't ready to let him go. Not now. Not ever. Outside the glass wall of the ICU room, nurses moved briskly, charting notes, adjusting medications, and attending to patients. The ward was busy, but every so often, a passing nurse would glance into this room, sensing the weight of what was happening. It was a quiet vigil, a daughter's love battling the uncertainty of her father's survival. And then came a presence that didn't belong. A woman, dressed neatly but with an expression sharp as broken glass, appeared in the hallway. She didn't have the weary look of a family member. Instead, she walked with a purposeful stride, scanning the room as if assessing it for flaws. Her name was Karen, though in the neighborhood, she was known for much more than just her name. She was the self-appointed watchdog of their homeowners association, the kind of person who left passive-aggressive notes on doorsteps and called city officials over the height of someone's lawn. Karen's history with the man in the bed was far from friendly. For years, they had clashed over petty neighborhood disputes, trash cans left out too long, fence colors that didn't meet HOA standards, even the sound of his lawnmower on early Saturday mornings. Each argument had left her more bitter. And now, standing outside his ICU room, that bitterness was visible in the tight set of her jaw. She stepped inside without hesitation, ignoring the sign that clearly said family only. Her eyes swept over the machines, the wires, the pale figure on the bed. "So this is what it's come to," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the daughter to hear. The daughter looked up, startled and immediately on guard. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. Karen tilted her head slightly, as if she were the one entitled to an explanation. "I just came to see how bad it was," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Then, with a small shake of her head, she added, "You know, sometimes it's better to just let things go." The daughter's face tightened, and she instinctively moved her chair closer to her father. "You need to leave," she said firmly. But Karen didn't leave. Instead, she stepped closer to the bed, her gaze fixed on the ventilator as if it were the villain in the room. "Do you even know how much this costs? How much it's costing the community?" she asked, her words like tiny darts, aimed at the most vulnerable spot. A nurse passing by caught sight of Karen's presence and stepped in. "Ma'am, this area is restricted to immediate family," the nurse said, her voice calm but authoritative. Karen turned to her, eyes narrowing. "I am part of this man's community," she said sharply. "I have a right to be concerned. He's been a burden for years, and now we're just dragging this out." The nurse's expression didn't change, but her stance became firmer. "Medical decisions are for family members and doctors only. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen crossed her arms, planting herself in the room like she owned it. Her gaze returned to the patient, and there was no compassion in it, only a strange satisfaction, as if she saw this moment as some kind of personal victory. The daughter stood, her voice shaking with rage. "Get out," she repeated, each word slow and deliberate. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment it seemed she might obey, but instead she leaned slightly forward, peering at the equipment, keeping the man alive. "You think you're helping him," she said quietly, "but you're just holding on to something that's already gone." The room seemed to grow colder with those words. The daughter's grip on her father's hand tightened, as if to shield him from the cruelty standing just a few feet away. The nurse took a step closer to Karen, ready to escort her out. But Karen didn't move. Her eyes kept darting toward the ventilator, as though she were weighing some decision in her mind, one that no sane person would even consider in this sacred space of healing and hope. Karen's gaze lingered far too long on the ventilator, her expression unreadable, but unsettling. The rhythmic hiss and click of the machine seemed to draw her in, as though each assisted breath was an offense to her. The daughter kept her eyes locked on her, feeling her pulse quicken, her protective instincts sharpening with every second. This was no ordinary intrusion. There was intent in Karen's presence, an edge to her posture that hinted at something far worse than words. The nurse positioned herself between Karen and the bed, her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm asking you one last time, please leave this room." Karen tilted her chin upward, unwilling to back down. "And I'm telling you, I have just as much right to be here as anyone. This man, he's been a thorn in my side for years. Do you even know the trouble he's caused in our neighborhood? Now everyone's paying the price for him being here." The daughter's jaw clenched. "No one is paying anything for my father but me," she shot back. "And whatever history you think matters here, it doesn't. This is a hospital, not an HOA meeting." Karen gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think you can separate the two? Everything's connected. He was irresponsible in life, and now he's being irresponsible in whatever this is." She gestured toward the bed, her tone dismissive, as though the man's condition was a matter of choice. The nurse, recognizing the escalation, discreetly signaled toward the hallway, likely calling for security. But Karen was already shifting her weight, glancing around the room as though looking for something. Her eyes flicked briefly to the life support equipment, and that was enough to make the daughter's breath hitch in alarm. "You need to leave now," the daughter said again, stepping into Karen's path. Her voice was lower this time, more controlled, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. Karen smirked. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she said, though the way her gaze kept drifting back to the ventilator betrayed her words. "I'm here to make things easier. Sometimes you have to step in when people can't make the hard choices themselves." Those words made the nurse's face harden. "You don't make choices here," she said, each syllable precise. "This man is our patient, and his treatment will continue as prescribed by his medical team and approved by his legal next of kin. You are neither." Karen's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she sidestepped toward the bed, her eyes narrowing. The daughter quickly moved with her, blocking her path again. "This is insane," Karen muttered. "Keeping him alive like this." She broke off, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone. "You could be free of this. You know, free from the expense, the waiting, the uncertainty. You could start over." The daughter's eyes flashed with fury, but before she could respond, the sound of quick footsteps filled the hall. 2 uniformed hospital security officers appeared in the doorway, their expressions set with professional seriousness. One of them addressed Karen immediately. "Ma'am, you need to step out of this room with us right now." Karen's lips tightened. "You can't just throw me out." "We can, and we will," the officer interrupted, his voice calm but unyielding. "This is a restricted medical area, and you are not authorized to be here. You've been asked to leave multiple times." The nurse stepped back slightly, giving the officers room to approach, but Karen still didn't budge. Her eyes darted between them, then back to the patient, and there was something unnerving in the way she seemed to calculate her next move. The daughter's heart was pounding now, her hand still gripping her father's. She could feel the tension vibrating in the air, the sickening awareness that this woman, someone who had been nothing more than a petty neighborhood nuisance, was now standing in a space where her actions could mean life or death. One of the officers stepped closer, his presence filling the small ICU room. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you need to walk out with us. If you refuse, we'll have to remove you physically." Karen's jaw clenched, her gaze flicking once more toward the ventilator, as if it were the source of all her irritation. The daughter followed that gaze, realizing with a cold knot in her stomach that Karen's fixation wasn't just idle curiosity, it was temptation. The officers moved in closer, but Karen raised a hand, as if to stall them. I'm just saying what no one else will, she said, her voice sharp. Sometimes you have to do what's best for everyone, not just cling to false hope for yourself. The daughter took a step forward, her voice trembling but fierce. And sometimes what's best for everyone is keeping people like you far away from someone who can't defend himself. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. The steady hiss of the ventilator and the rhythmic beeping of the monitor seemed louder now, underscoring the reality of how fragile the moment was. Karen's presence felt like a dark shadow over the bed, an intrusion not just into space, but into the dignity and safety of someone fighting for their life. The officers exchanged a glance, silently agreeing on their next move, as Karen stood there, still rooted in place, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line, while her eyes darted again toward the machines, keeping the man alive. The officers didn't waste another second. One of them stepped in, taking a firm but controlled hold of Karen's arm, while the other positioned himself between her and the bed. The daughter could see Karen's posture tighten instantly, her shoulders going rigid, as if she were about to resist, her mouth open to protest. But the lead officer's tone left no room for debate. "Ma'am, you are being escorted out of this facility for the safety of our patients," he said, his voice calm but charged with authority. "You've been warned multiple times, and you've refused to comply." Karen twisted slightly, trying to pull her arm free, her eyes flashing with indignation. "You can't just manhandle me. I'm not some criminal. I'm here because I care, because no one else will make the hard choice." The daughter's heart pounded harder at those words. It wasn't just Karen's stubbornness, it was the conviction behind her tone that made her dangerous. This wasn't a casual outburst. This was someone who truly believed she had the right to interfere, to decide the fate of another human being without consent. The second officer held up a hand, his voice steady but firm. "You've made your intentions clear, and they are not welcome here. You are leaving now." Karen scoffed, jerking her chin toward the bed. "So you're all just going to sit here, watching him waste away? That's mercy to you." The nurse stepped in then, her usually gentle face set in a rare display of steel. "Mercy," she said, her tone measured, "is protecting our patients from people who think they have the right to end their lives without cause. You are not his doctor. You are not his family. You have no place here." For a brief moment, Karen's eyes flicked toward the nurse, and then to the daughter. There was something almost calculating in her expression, as though she was weighing whether to make one last attempt to push past them. The daughter instinctively shifted closer to her father, putting her body between Karen and the machines. Security guided her toward the doorway, but Karen resisted with every step, planting her feet and leaning back like a stubborn child. "This is harassment," she barked. "I'm going to report all of you. You think you're the good guys, but you're just enabling suffering." The daughter clenched her jaw, her voice low but trembling with controlled fury. "The only one causing suffering right now is you." That seemed to land. Karen's eyes narrowed, and her lips twisted into a tight sneer. But she didn't answer. Instead, she made one last attempt to glance over her shoulder toward the ventilator, as if she could will herself to change the outcome just by looking at it. The lead officer caught the movement and subtly adjusted his stance, positioning himself fully in her line of sight to block the machines from view. The action was small, but it carried the unmistakable message: "You will not touch him." Outside the room, the sound of muffled voices in the hallway hinted that a few hospital staff and visitors had begun to notice the disturbance. A couple of nurses peeked in from the nurses' station, their expressions tense. This wasn't the usual kind of ICU disruption. They all seemed to that something far more unsettling was unfolding. Karen's voice, sharp and insistent, cut through the murmurs. "You can't just drag me out without listening to reason. Someone needs to say it. Keeping him like this is cruel. I'm the only one willing to speak the truth." The daughter's fists tightened at her sides, her breath quick and shallow. It took everything in her not to shout back. She wanted to tell Karen exactly what kind of cruelty she was capable of, to lay bare the audacity of walking into someone's most vulnerable moment and trying to rewrite it. But the nurse's subtle shake of the head told her it wasn't worth giving Karen any more fuel. The officers began moving again, this time with more force behind each step. Karen stumbled once, muttering under her breath about cowards and blind loyalty, her voice dripping with disdain. As they reached the doorway, Karen twisted her neck to get one last look inside the room. Her eyes locked with the daughter's, and for a fleeting moment, something almost like pity, or perhaps twisted self-righteousness, passed over her face. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't remorse. It was the look of someone who still believed, even in that moment, that she was right. The daughter felt a chill run through her. That unwavering belief in her own moral authority was what made Karen so dangerous. She didn't just want to meddle, she wanted control, the kind that came at the expense of someone else's life. The nurse exhaled slowly. Once Karen's arm disappeared from the doorway, her shoulders relaxing, only a fraction. "She won't be allowed back," she said, though the daughter could tell it was as much reassurance for herself as it was for her. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator seemed louder now that the shouting had faded. The daughter returned her gaze to her father's face, his stillness a stark contrast to the chaos that had just played out. She reached for his hand again, her grip tightening, silently promising that no matter who came through that door, she would protect him from anyone who thought they had the right to decide his fate. Karen's voice could still be heard echoing faintly from the hallway, muffled by the thick ICU walls, but each word carried the same stubborn edge. The daughter could feel her pulse slowly returning to normal, though her body remained tense, as if expecting Karen to burst back through the door at any moment. The officers had managed to move her farther down the hall, but the situation was far from resolved. The nurse moved toward the door, peeking into the corridor before quietly stepping out to speak with the officers. The daughter stayed by her father's side, her eyes fixed on the steady rise and fall of his chest. Every mechanical breath felt like a small victory, a sign that for now he was still safe. But the earlier confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The idea that a stranger had been so willing to physically interfere with his care, so certain in her own misguided righteousness, lingered like a dark shadow in the room. The sound of footsteps returned, and the nurse stepped back inside, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "They're escorting her completely off the premises," she said quietly. "Security will file a report, and she's now banned from the hospital." Her tone carried a firmness meant to reassure, but the faint crease between her brows betrayed that she, too, understood the seriousness of what had just happened. The daughter nodded, but didn't speak right away. Her throat felt tight, not from tears, but from the weight of what could have happened if security hadn't arrived in time. She kept her hand on her father's, feeling the faint warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, and tried to ground herself in the simple truth that he was still here. The nurse gently adjusted the IV line, her movements precise and practiced. "You should know," she began, after a moment. "People like her, they can be unpredictable. Sometimes they truly believe they're helping. Sometimes it's about control. Either way, it's dangerous." The daughter thought back to the look in Karen's eyes, that unnerving blend of conviction and defiance. It wasn't the gaze of someone who had simply made a poor decision in the heat of the moment. It was the gaze of someone who had already justified their actions in their own mind, no matter the consequences. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. One of the officers stepped inside, removing his cap as a sign of respect. "Ma'am," he addressed the daughter, "we've confirmed she's been removed from the property. We've also informed local law enforcement of the incident. If you'd like to file a formal statement, we can arrange that before you leave today." She swallowed, her instinct to protect her father outweighing any hesitation. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want it on record. I don't want her coming near him again." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "We'll make sure that's in the system. We've also requested that her photo be kept on file for security." He glanced toward the bed, his voice softening. "You don't have to worry tonight. We'll have extra patrols on this floor." After he left, the nurse offered a small, understanding smile. "You're doing everything right. Not everyone has the strength to stand up to situations like that." The daughter exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders loosening just enough for her to notice how sore her muscles had become. She realized she had been bracing herself since the moment Karen had entered the room, like someone waiting for a blow. Her mind drifted back to the first time she had walked into the ICU. The quiet hum of machines, the rhythmic beeping, the subdued conversations between nurses. It had all felt strangely comforting despite the circumstances. She had told herself then that this was a place of safety, a place where her father would be surrounded by professionals who knew how to keep him alive. Now she understood that safety was sometimes fragile, and that even here, it could be disrupted by the intrusion of one determined individual. The nurse began tidying the room, straightening the blanket, and checking the monitors. The soft glow of the screens reflected in her eyes, a constant reminder that every number and waveform mattered. The daughter watched her work, grateful for the quiet competence, the unspoken promise that someone was always watching over her father. But beneath that gratitude was an ember of unease that refused to go out. Karen's words about mercy, about making the hard choice, kept replaying in her mind. It wasn't just the threat of her actions, but the twisted logic behind them that left the daughter unsettled. How many others might think the same way? How many strangers believed they had the right to decide who lived or died, based on nothing more than their own judgment? She reached for the chair beside the bed and sank into it, leaning forward so her elbows rested on her knees. For a long moment, she simply listened to the ventilator's steady hiss, letting it anchor her in the present. The outside world could rage with opinions and self-appointed saviors, but here in this room, her focus was singular, keeping him safe for as long as it took. A soft buzz from her phone pulled her from her thoughts. It was a message from her brother, asking for an update. She typed a brief reply, deciding to spare him the details for now. He didn't need the image of Karen burned into his mind the way it was burned into hers. The nurse, sensing her fatigue, offered to bring her some water. The daughter accepted, grateful for the small kindness. As the nurse stepped out, she let her gaze return to her father's face, memorizing every line, every faint movement, as if to remind herself that he was still fighting in his own way.